Okay, welcome everybody. Um, good afternoon. Welcome to the Sierra Club Pennsylvania Chapter Conservation Fall Webinar Series. This session is titled Fracking Stories in Western Pennsylvania, CNX versus the State of Pennsylvania, and is hosted by the Pennsylvania Chapter's Dirty Energy Conservation Team. My name is Jim Wiley, and my volunteer role with the Sierra Club Pennsylvania chapter is as the Conservation Vice Chair. Before I introduce today's speakers and today's topic, let's do a little housekeeping. I've muted everybody. I haven't muted everybody. Let me do that. Okay, and please keep your microphones muted until you are invited to come off mute. Towards the end, you are invited to introduce yourself with your name, your county, or town in the chat. You can enter questions into the chat. We will have time for discussion at the end of the speaker's presentation. I'll be about 30 minutes. If a question seems like a clarifying question, like what does an acronym mean, I might interrupt the speaker. So thank you for those considerations. Okay, let's get started with today's program. So I'm Jim Wiley. As I said, I'm the Chapter Conservation Vice Chair. We also have with us today two organizers from the Center for Coalfield Justice, Jodi Borello and Janice Blanock. So this is a part of the Fall Conservation webinar series. I've got a link to the full series. I've been replacing the register links with the recordings as we've done them. This is the 6th of 7. So we've had fun, and I'm getting the hang of this now. I hope you are getting the hang of listening to us. So with that, I'll stop sharing and let Jodi start her presentation. If I can find there it is.
Yeah, well,
Okay,
good
Jodi.
afternoon. Yeah, thank you, Jim. And thank you for having us and allowing us to be able to tell our stories of Southwestern PA. So my name is Jodi Borello, and
my name's Janice Blanock.
Yeah.
Nice to be with you today.
Yeah, thank you for having us. I'm going to go ahead. We're going to show a slideshow, and I am going to start sharing my screen. Can everyone see?
Yes, looks good.
Okay. So again, Jan and I work for the Center for Coalfield Justice. We are an environmental justice organization based out of Washington and Greene County in southwestern Pennsylvania. And we do a lot of work with residents that are having issues with the coal mine and also with oil and gas, because these are two very large industries in our communities. So this afternoon, we're going to be discussing CNX resources and what they do in Washington and Greene counties. So we're particularly going to be talking about the CNX gas wells that were in South Franklin Township, Washington County, and in particular their pigging station, one of their pigging stations, which is the Oak Springs pigging station in South Franklin Township, Washington County. So what you see now is a Google Earth image of a localized area in South Franklin Township. If you look where it says Park Avenue Baptist Church, and you go a little bit to the top of the screen, you'll see Route 18. And that's the general location of my home where I live. So these well pads look kind of far away, right? According to this photo. But the closest well, the very top well, that is CNX NV42. And if you loop around, you will see the next pad is NV41, and then we have NV39 and so on. And at the bottom of the screen, you will see one of their impoundments. So that is just kind of to give you an example of how many gas wells are right in this generalized location. When you go back to the where I had pointed out where I lived, so these wells are approximately 1,200 feet away from my home because we're located on two hillsides. And when you look, you'll see a tiny silver dot kind of right below that NV42. If you come down between the Route 18 sign and the Park Avenue, you'll see a tiny silver dot. And in that location is one of CNX's pigging stations. And I don't know if you're familiar with what a pigging station is, but this is where the gathering lines come and they need to clean out all of the gunk and everything in those gathering lines that will damage their equipment at the processing facilities. So they have to keep these clean. They insert what looks almost like a bullet. They insert that into the pipeline, for example, at NV42, and they will shoot this pig to this receiver station that is behind my home. And this pigging station is approximately 1,200 feet away on the adjacent hillside. But when they need to remove that pig, what they do, they have to release the gas in the line and pull the pig out. But when they do that, all of the contaminants that they don't want getting into their processing facility is then blown off into the air. It would shoot approximately 40 feet up into the air and it would blow into my yard. And I'll show you an example of that. So the video I'm going to show you is an example of their pigging operations. CNX was doing this 7 days a week, 3 times a day for approximately a decade.
It's crawling right down all of that guy's running, blowing right towards the house. Look at it. It's coming straight at our house. That's not gas.
Okay, close the door.
So again, CNX was doing that 7 days a week, 3 times a day for a decade. That rendered my yard completely useless. These pig stations are not permitted. I actually had to contact the DEP. It took them almost 10 years to tell me that that was a pigging station. In the meantime, I began documenting how many times that they were pigging at that station and doing blowdowns of the gas wells from that station because it was so outrageous. I thought maybe eventually someone is going to realize what's taking place there. When those emissions would blow into our yard, we would get rashes and chemical burns. My family had chemical burns to our skin. We had chemical burns to our eyes, and we were on prednisone for a very long time. The photo that you see here is my youngest son. He was approximately 2 years old at the time. And anytime he was exposed, this is what would happen to him. This is on another date. You can see my son with his rash on the side of his face, on the back of his neck, on his ears. I can tell you from my own personal experience with these rashes, they burned. They were very painful. This is a picture of myself with my rash on my chest. We would get this rash anywhere that our skin was exposed when we were outside, when this emissions would blow into our yard. It took us about maybe embarrassing enough to admit, maybe about a year before we realized, hey, we can no longer be outside when they're blowing off, because we realized the direct correlation between our rashes and the exposure to these emissions. So I told you that I was keeping documents of all of these incidents. I had contacted the DEP numerous times. They were no help to me whatsoever. I was getting nowhere. So I eventually contacted the Attorney General's office, and they asked me to testify at the 43rd statewide grand jury. I did have an NDA. It recently was lifted, so I'm able to talk about my experience at the 43rd statewide grand jury. I can tell you that when they asked me to testify there, I had no idea what I was testifying about. It was very secretive. All I knew that I was going to tell my story, what happened, and how no one was helping me from the state. So I don't know if you're familiar with the 43rd statewide grand jury, but in the end, when the results came out, they had 8 grand jury recommendations. One of them was to expand the no drill zones in PA from the required 500 feet to 2,500 feet. And why this one in particular I want to point out is because you can see, looking at that photo that I showed, what the distance, it looks far, right? That those facilities look far from my home, but they are approximately 1,200 feet away. And we know that that was affecting my family at that length. And currently you can put a well 500 feet next to someone's home. So that is really, really important. One of the recommendations that I want to see be passed, because these are directly related to testimony from people in Washington County that testified at this statewide grand jury. This isn't an arbitrary number that someone made up. This number came from the testimony of people that live in our community that are being affected by oil and gas.
Sorry, Jodi, just real quick, what year was this grand jury report?
So the grand jury report came out, I believe it was in late June or early July of 2020. And if memory serves me correctly, I testified, I think it was in 2019. So it was a long process, right? I mean, there was a lot put into that. This wasn't something that was just done quickly. It was, I'm very proud of it. I'm very proud of my testimony, and I'm very proud of the other people that testified there that don't have the ability to talk about it or talk about their experiences. So after the 43rd statewide grand jury, I was asked to testify at the 46th statewide grand jury, which was directly against CNX Resources for what they were doing behind my home. They ended up pleading no contest to the criminal charges on December 2nd of 2021. And the listed here are their the criminal charges. So they had unlawful conduct, Air Pollution Control Act. And again, what the Attorney General's office was able to do was to look at my documents, my years of documentation and photographs and videos. And they were able to go to CNX and say, hey, we have all this photographic evidence of you blowing off at this pig station. Please produce your data and your reports to us. And CNX was unable to do that because they were not keeping accurate data, which is extremely important for people to understand. And I'll get back to that in the presentation. So again, what I want to make sure that people understand about those criminal charges is that at the time when they were pigging, CNX was self-reporting these pigging logs. And you can see here on this slide that, again, they pled no contest. This happened in the McGuffey community, which I'll get back to again as well. And why that's important is because with the radical transparency, this is also happening in the McGuffey School District community. So in the affidavit of probable cause, they talked about CNX not accurately reporting their emissions at this Oak Springs pigging station, which didn't even have a name. I want to point that out. This pigging station didn't have a name until after the criminal charges. So again, these pigging stations do not even exist on paper. No one even knows. The DEP isn't even aware that they're there. They're unpermitted. So CNX Resources was also underreporting emissions, and why that's important is because they are not keeping accurate data. I am just a neighbor that lived next to this facility, and I was able to keep CNX's data and their reporting, but they as a company were not able to do that. The Attorney General's office had asked them to amend their reports, and CNX again gave them inaccurate data. Another thing that they found that these errors by CNX were not only limited to this Oak Springs facility. This was happening all over where they do business. And also these emissions caused a severe disruption to the quality of life of my family and my neighbors. I mean, we were not able to even use our yards. It was horrifying. I would like to say if this were happening in another country, people would be up in arms about this, that children cannot play outside because they're getting sprayed with harmful chemicals. But it was happening in Washington County in Pennsylvania, and no one cared about it. Another thing I want to point out is that the Attorney General's office stated that CNX has acknowledged to reporting fraudulent emissions information, and that's key to our conversation here as well. So we're going to get back to CNX and get a little bit more into that, but right now I would like to pass it on to Jan, where she's going to kind of fill in spaces of what's been happening here.
Hello, and thank you for having me today. What I want to share with everybody today is more of a personal issue that involved my son Luke. Some of you may have heard of his story, but I'll share a little bit with you today as well. My son Luke was born on April 1st, 1997. Healthy, young, beautiful boy who just grew into the love of sports. He loved sports. He was excellent in school, just a great all-around kid. But as you can see, he was a healthy young teenage boy one day, and then started having pain in his lower spine. And within a very short time, within a few days, as a matter of fact, he was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer called Ewing sarcoma. It's a progressive pediatric bone cancer. And immediately Luke had to have the baseball-sized tumor removed from his spine. As you could see in the first picture, it was pressing against the nerves, and it was causing him severe pain, like nothing could take that pain away. And these pictures, as hard as they are to see, I wanted to make people aware that, like, our children are suffering these rare cancers, and cancer, it just ravages their bodies. And it's just upsetting to see that this is happening in our communities. And we think, I mean, I can't say for sure that there is a correlation between fracking and Luke's cancer, but I think that we need to pay attention to the studies that have already been done, and we need to, follow some of the recommendations from this grand jury that say setbacks from people's homes and schools need to be further than 500 feet. It's absurd. So I didn't really understand what was happening. And I guess I was, my life was I was preoccupied with caring for my son during those 3 years. He was diagnosed when he was 16. And he passed 3 years later at the age of 19. But in that time, we obviously were preoccupied caring for him and just living life as best as we could. But after Luke passed, I came to realize that there were several other young adults in our community that I kind of knew on a personal level. The young man in the top picture with the baseball cap on belonged to our church, which is in walking distance from our home. And he also went to Canon McMillan High School. I got permission from all of these folks to use their children's pictures, but so that young man is Cal Delir, and he died from Ewing sarcoma right before Luke was diagnosed. We prayed for him every Sunday at church, but I didn't really understand what was his what was his diagnosis. The young man in the picture with the lake behind him, his name is Curtis Ballant. And I didn't know him personally, but I met his mom while Luke was being treated at Children's Hospital, and they lived about a mile or so up the road. So his mom and I have become very close friends, and I just thought that was very strange that here we are, these 3 young adults that live so close in this community, and this is supposedly such a rare cancer. So I was very concerned. But then the young man in the bottom picture at the hospital is a friend. Is the son of my friend, Christine Barton. And that is her son, Mitch. Now, Mitch and Luke also went to the same school. They played on the same baseball team. Luke was the pitcher and Mitch was the catcher. So whenever I got the phone call from a mutual friend saying, could you give Christine a call? She's, her son Mitch was diagnosed with Ewing's. I immediately became just overwhelmed with fear and anger, actually, because why wasn't anybody paying attention and doing something about this, understanding like this is a rare cancer and you have 3 young adults in this small town. And it wasn't just them, there were others. There was a young girl who actually is a survivor. There was another young man, an older gentleman in his 20s that lived in Cecil Township. So, I just couldn't understand why this rare cancer was happening so frequently. And some of the folks that that went to school at Canon McMillan, imagine you have high school students who are learning of 3 of their classmates being diagnosed for these 3 gentlemen, plus Luke, and then the young girl, so 5. And I'm sure they had to be thinking, who's next? This is supposed to be so rare. What is happening here? So that's when I had to step up and get involved. And I got involved with Environmental Health Project. I actually was scrolling through Facebook and heard them having a live meeting discussing these cases of Ewing sarcoma, and they were speaking of my son. So I reached out the next day and I got involved with Environmental Health Project, which led me to a connection with Center for Coalfield Justice. And Center for Coalfield Justice set up a bus trip to Harrisburg to try and speak to some of the local state representatives and to the governor at the time, Governor Wolf, to see we need studies done. We need help from from the government in, realizing what is taking place in our communities. So we did speak with a few of our state representatives. We could not get a meeting with Governor Wolf, but fortunately for us, we ran into him in the hallway. I mean, we literally ran into him in the hallway. As you could see by the look on his face, completely caught off guard. But we shared our stories in that hallway and kind of basically demanded that something be done. And that's when he awarded, a $2.5 million contract to the University of Pittsburgh to study the effects of hydraulic fracturing in Pennsylvania. So as part of that large group. One thing led to another with that. I got a phone call one day from this lovely lady here saying, I've heard your story and I have a story of my own, and would you like to meet for coffee? So Jodi and I actually got together, and she asked me, like, what would I like to see as a parent who lost a child, and I'm concerned about, the environmental effects from fracking. What would I like to see done? And my suggestion to her was like maybe a group of parents, moms and dads. We need to get involved and speak up, because obviously nobody's speaking up for us. So, I went home, she and I brainstormed, and we came up with the perfect name, I think, MADFACS, Moms and Dads, Family Awareness of Cancer Threat Spike. So we just were a, volunteer-led support group through Center for Coalfield Justice, and we just urged parents to get involved, and we were there to support them, families who are dealing with kids that are struggling with illnesses presently, and just to guide them, to support them, and to educate them so that we can push this agenda to get the help that we need. And we have done that recently in the area, the community that I live in is Cecil Township in Washington County, Pennsylvania. And we recently, over the last several months, have had hearings to try to change the ordinance for the setback from 500 feet to 2,500 feet. And I'm happy to say that we pushed it through. So we now have a 2,500 foot setback from homes and a 5,000 foot setback from schools and hospitals. And so with that, I'd like to just pass it over to Jodi, because she, through Center for Coalfield Justice, really helped to get this group going.
So one thing that through MADFACS, that we have monthly community meetings in different areas of Washington and Greene County. And one of, other than what Jan was talking about with the setbacks, we also trying to push the results of the Pitt study. So it took a while, but we eventually were given the results in August of 2023. And the Pennsylvania Department of Health, this is a taxpayer-funded study. And what it found was that people with asthma living near wells during the production phase had a 4 to 5 greater chance of their asthma getting worse. Also, they found that children living close to wells were at a 5 to 7 times greater risk of developing lymphoma. So this is another reason, again, to start pushing with these setbacks. These wells should not be that close to people's homes. And we're also seeing in our communities a lot of glioblastoma in adults, and people really are quite concerned about this. And our Department of Health is saying this with children living close to wells. So we want to make sure that people have access to the results of that study. This is a couple pictures when the Department of Health came to announce the results. A lot of people were there, and we were pretty pleased. Several parents got up and spoke, and that takes a lot of courage. So we're really proud of our residents. So back to CNX and how this all kind of loops together. On November 2nd of 2023, the now Governor Josh Shapiro came to a small town called Claysville, Pennsylvania. This is in the McGuffey School District where CNX had committed their crimes. The governor showed up unannounced to the public. We have a very beautiful community. Claysville's a wonderful place. They have parades and holiday celebrations, and they would have been ecstatic to have the governor come to Claysville, Pennsylvania. There is no doubt in my mind the parades and festivities that would have happened. But Governor Shapiro showed up unannounced to East Findlay Township, just a few miles outside of Claysville, but still Claysville, Pennsylvania. And he did a press release and announced this mutual interest agreement with the criminal company CNX Resources. And this really took the community members that were harmed by CNX. It was a little bit shocking for them, right? Because we were victims of these crimes. They impacted our lives. And Governor Shapiro knew that. I testified at 2 of his grand juries. He was well aware of the impacts that CNX Resources had on our communities. I had spoken to him on the phone. He asked about my children. So our community was a little taken aback by this. And especially that it was unannounced. So things that are listed in this mutual interest agreement, and again, I want to go back to the grand jury. They want and suggested, and this is a jury of our peers, their recommendation was a 2,500-foot setback. Well, within the mutual interest agreement between the governor's office and CNX, they said that they will refrain from drilling wells 600 feet from a home. So this is only 100 feet from what it is now at 500 feet. So it really is not really beneficial for the residents. Also, a few other things. They said that they were going to do water monitoring, air monitoring, and some radiation protection plans. But again, if I can go back, this is the company that was in trouble for keeping inaccurate data. And now we should trust them to provide not only the community, but the governor's office and the Department of Environmental Protection with accurate data when they receive criminal charges for those very things. So, I urge everybody to get on to the Radical Transparency site and you can read for yourself. A couple of their claims that the natural gas industry has a history of placing the safety of the community and workers as their top priorities. But again, you can see in the video and my story, my safety was not, I believe, was not of the utmost importance for CNX or my communities. And they also are claiming that the program will definitively confirm for all stakeholders that there are no human health problems related to natural gas development. I can tell you the medication that my family was on, we were on prednisone for chemical burns to our eyes and rashes, constant rashes. I could also tell you about the number of cancers that are on my hillside alone. Extremely alarming. They range from glioblastoma to bone cancer to leukemia to cancer of the appendix. I mean, this is just on my road on one hillside, and there are numerous of those types of cancers. It's not just one person with glioblastoma. There were 4. And third, but not least, CNX says they also believe that CNX will learn things through this data that will enable us to enhance our operating practices to make things even better. We don't want to be a human experiment, right? We know what we lived. We know what the Department of Health is studying, or their study revealed. So these are the facts. These are what we know. So another thing that caught me a little bit off guard with this, CNX had mailed out a flyer to everyone that lives within that McGuffey area of their radical transparency sites. And this is the statement they're making. But again, when is the DEP? When is the governor's office? And when will our senators, legislators, when are they going to acknowledge the results of the Department of Health study on fracking? We want them to acknowledge this. We know this. So we are hoping that they will eventually acknowledge those results. Again, this is I just wanted to put this on here for a reminder. To the left is a statement made by CNX Resources, but we know 100+ studies agree fracking puts our health at risk, and our own PA Department of Health, those are the results of their health study, one being children living close to wells were at a 5 to 7 greater risk of developing lymphoma. And this is our number to contact us. And stop sharing here. I don't know if anyone has any questions or would like me to clarify anything.
Okay, Jodi and Janice, thank you very much for that
You're welcome.
moving set of stories. Really appreciate it. Before we get into the Q&A, I want to introduce Kelsey Krebs. Kelsey, you want to show us your lovely face? Maybe Kelsey can help answer some of our questions. I don't know if you guys have met Kelsey before. You guys work in the same field.
Well, hi, y'all. I apologize.
Hi.
I'm listening off camera here, but getting a little bit of lunch, so didn't want my face eating food on the camera here.
All right, thanks. So let me walk through. We've got lots of supporting sentiments in the chat, as well as a few questions. I'll just go in order that I see them. Sydney asks about the grand jury effort and was there any relation to the Pennsylvania environmental clause in the Constitution? You know what I'm talking about?
So I wasn't privy to them, their internal discussions with the grand jury recommendations. What I can say is just what I had testified about. I don't know what the discussions of the jurors were or how they incorporated that, or I don't know.
So maybe I missed it, but what was this lawsuit about? Was it brought up was it Pennsylvania versus,
Oh, I see.
Or was it you? I mean, who are the...
Okay, yeah, let me clarify that. So there were a group of people that early on, 2009, 10, 11, that were really having a lot of issues. And they had no one to turn to. And I will tell you that a lot of us had become very good friends throughout the years because we only had each other to rely on. And again, it grew and grew because people were having more and more issues. I mean, it just as it is today, like people, it's never ending. It's always the next person. But several people in the community, what that process looks like, you contact your local district attorney, you tell them what issues that you're having, and you request that this be bumped to the Attorney General's office. And that's how that process started. So it started, this grand jury started with people in our communities, and not just in Washington, that were, having issues and needed help and had absolutely no one to turn to. The DEP would not help any of us, and in some cases couldn't help. So that's how that grand jury came about, through our community members.
All right, thanks. Is there a health department in Washington County, and were they involved?
No, they were not. And we don't have,
Mhm.
Allegheny County has a health department, Washington does not.
Okay. Okay, so yeah. So some of these questions were answered. I'm just trying to filter this a little bit. Are there other like YouTube videos and stuff that document this process?
Personally, I have thousands. I mean, they did this 7 days a week, 3 times a day. I have thousands of videos and photos of these pigging events behind my home. I have not put them on YouTube, but I do have them, and that I could share. And this is actually even after the criminal charges. CNX is still doing blowdowns at that pigging station. For example, I think it was last January, they blew off, I witnessed it for over an hour, and videotaped it, even contacted the police. There was a police report. I had documentation that it lasted for an hour. The DEP would not accept any of my video evidence. They contacted CNX. CNX said we blew off for 29 minutes, even though my videos show it was much longer. The DEP accepted that evidence. They admitted they blew off 527,000 SCF of methane. My evidence shows that would be closer to 1 million. That is enough methane to fill an average size Hobby Lobby. That is a wasted natural resource. So not only is it harmful to humans, but also they lost a lot of money. It's gone. That methane's gone.
Sure, it's fuel, and it's a greenhouse gas, and it's yeah, fugitive emissions. Maybe this is a better question for Kelsey, but what's the rate of new wells being drilled in Pennsylvania? Like there's new wells being drilled all the time, right? Kelsey, do you know?
I don't have the numbers offhand. At the same time, things have been slowing down. That doesn't necessarily mean that, like a lot of leases, for example, have been in, what do I want to say? They've already been purchased, but they're not drilled yet. So this is where it's like we may be seeing things slowing down in terms of purchases, but that doesn't mean that there aren't sites that still need to be developed, and have been purchased for over the years that we're talking. So it's also dependent on a lot of market stuff, and gas is definitely a really volatile market. Also volatile market in terms of how they approach that as well, in terms of particular slowdowns, like prioritizing certain areas based off of other economies that they're trying to like make up. And so yeah, I know that it's slowed down at the same time that like we're still seeing massive amounts of gas leaving Pennsylvania, and being utilized here. So I don't know if there would be more information that y'all would love to share, but that's my take on in terms of gas being drilled. The number specifically, I would probably be sharing a frac tracker link here in the chat here shortly, for those specifics.
Okay, thanks. And the new setback regulations, do they apply just to new wells, or do they apply to existing as well?
They applied to new. So what happened here in Cecil was that the supervisors voted that an individual or a family could have a well pad on their property as long as it was the 2,500 foot setback from the home.
Your-
But if your neighbor agreed to do it, and it was, so if you talk to your neighbor and your neighbor said, okay, I'm okay with that, they could do it. They could permit a new well pad. Now, the well pads that are already here presently, I mean, I have a friend who lives 528 feet from a well pad. And there's nothing that can be done for her and her family. They live with that constant vibration, the noise, the smell, so, but again, like Kelsey was saying, there are so many wells on that site now, but they have permits for additional ones that are still developing. So that won't change. But to be able to put a new well pad in, to permit a new well pad, it would have to be 2,500 foot from any homes, unless a neighbor or a surrounding, person agreed to permit that.
Right, Kelsey, I see your hand, but let me just quickly ask, is there technology that they could capture these emissions? Or are they just taking the cheap way out, or is it just something that can't be done with this? You guys know?
Well, that's a very good question. I'm not going to pretend like I'm an engineer, but I do know that they have closed loop systems where they can capture that. But a lot of times for safety reasons. So if the pressure builds up at, I'll just use an example, say if the pressure builds up at NV42, the well pad next to my home, they can push that pressure down the line and blow it off at the pigging station versus at the well pad where they would have to account for those emissions. They can blow that gas down to the pigging station and release the pressure there. So there's also that issue of it being a safety issue, right? I mean, it could be a problem.
Go ahead, Kelsey.
Yeah, my question actually was in direct to the Cecil Township passing the 25 or 2,500 setback. I did see that Senator Bartolotta put out a bill pretty fast in terms of going from memo to Senate bill talking about ways of which particular communities could be losing out on some of the impact fee money if they were to put things that I think they worded it pretty ambiguously in terms of like I can pull it up here, but I just wanted to know if there were ways that we could be supportive of pushing back against that particular language, if that impacts y'all, if there's like petitions that are going, if you imagine that this might be something that you would be fighting in the new year, in the new, so yeah, I just wanted to, it came out pretty quickly in terms of moving from a memo to a bill just right after y'all passed that, and I couldn't help but notice the correlation.
So a lot of times our politicians don't know what's happening in our communities. A lot of our residents have NDAs where they can no longer talk about what happened to them. So in response to that, we would like to invite Bertolotta and even Senator Yaw to come out and talk to the residents here that are being impacted. We would appreciate that opportunity to have them to come and speak to us. There are also petitions out there for the setback campaigns, buffer campaigns, and we would appreciate anyone signing that, anyone contacting their senators, legislators, and let them know that the residents need help with this because it's kind of difficult again because people have NDAs and can no longer talk about it.
We also would like to invite them to take a Frackland tour, is what we call them. A friend of ours through Clean Air Council, Lois Bjornson, does these Frackland tours where you basically go to communities and see firsthand how this has truly impacted people, their lives, their homes, their communities. When you see it firsthand, it's absolutely impossible to forget what you've seen and what you've learned. So we'd like to see them come and do that as well. I mean, it's something we'd like to see them do.
I appreciate the
thanks.
comments
Dale?
on that a lot. And yeah, if those links are handy, I can find a couple of them because I know the setback one they all sent around to I got it in my email, maybe a month or so ago when y'all did that webinar on that as well from the health study 1 year out. So I can send that around.
Yeah, thank you.
And just as a
Thanks, Kim.
suggestion, I was talking to Jodi earlier before we come on, and I thought I would like to put out some recommendations for some reading if y'all would be interested. But David Templeton used to be a reporter for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, and if you haven't read the series that he put out there a while back, it was called The Human Toll. That shared a lot of information about what was happening here in Washington County at the Cannon-McMillan School District area. But also the book Amity and Prosperity by Eliza Griswold and Petroleum 238 by Justin Noble. Those folks have been studying and working this harder than anybody I know, well, other than maybe Jodi and Center for Coalfield Justice, but there's such a wealth of information in all three of those readings.
So I'll be sending out a follow-up email to everybody that registered tomorrow. If you guys can send me those things in writing, I'll include those links in the follow-up email. Let me get through some more of these questions in the chat before we open it up. Dale mentions about the Radical Transparency from CNX, but how many wells are they, active wells are they really monitoring?
Yeah, so that's where this gets interesting. CNX had sold off a lot of their well pads. They sold them to HG Energy, and then HG Energy sold them to Diversified. So I was interested in this again because CNX really is kind of backed away from being a drilling company and does most of their stuff with their midstream, with their gas lines. So these radical transparency sites, you can actually find them on their website. You can see where their locations are, and you don't really truly grasp what these look like until you drive past. And I will tell you that compared to typical CNX well sites, they're beautiful. They have a paved road going up. They have beautiful drains. An average regular CNX site has a gravel road where they are spreading stuff on that looks like an oily substance. They're really quite different. And you can drive anywhere out in the Claysville area, and you can see the vast difference between one of their radical transparency sites and what a normal CNX facility looks like. There's quite a vast difference.
Thanks. And Sarah asks about, are there other ongoing lawsuits, both in CNX in your area and broader in Pennsylvania? Maybe Kelsey could speak to that. But is there some way you can give us a feeling for how much legal action is ongoing?
So I can tell you that people are going up against very large corporations that have many attorneys, and people can't afford it. They just simply cannot afford to bring suits against these companies. And what happens a lot of times, these companies will go to a person that's having a problem and they'll say, hey, we'll put you up in a hotel room for 2 weeks. I've heard of people being offered to go to Disney for 2 weeks. I've heard offers of, we will get you an RV. And I've even heard of people accepting $500. And a lot of times there are NDAs attached to those, and then those people can no longer complain. So they cannot talk to their neighbors about what they received or the issues that they were having. They can't talk to their outside family members. They can't talk to their senators. They can't talk to community groups that want to help them and help their communities. So things really get lost, and people don't know how normal that is in our community. It's quite a shame because people need help and they really have absolutely no
Nowhere to
one.
turn. Yeah.
So are people moving out of Western Pennsylvania, these areas?
No, and that's the normal reaction, right? You think, even in my case, you would say, well, Jodi, why didn't you move? Well, there's numerous reasons. One is the moral aspect, right? Am I going to sell my home to someone else knowing what was happening to my family? I would have to disclose that when I go to sell my home on the disclosure sheet. We had spoken with a real estate agent who told us to expect to lose 20% of the value of our home if we could sell it at all. I'd like to think my husband and I did everything right purchasing our home. We had equity in it. Am I going to lose that equity and everything that I worked very, very hard for because CNX moved behind my home and was spraying us with hydrochloric acid and methanol for 10 years? I mean, what do we do? And then where do we go? Do we buy property in Washington County that also has a lease and we have no idea what the past owner signed for or what the neighbor of that owner signed for? So there's really so much more to it. And your families live there, like your parents need your support. Now your kids are hitting an age where they're getting jobs and they can't, move away. I mean, we'd have to uproot, my family and my kids, and there's just so much to it. And quite frankly, that's our home. They should be they should be respecting that. And my neighbor surely couldn't spray my family with chemicals. He would have been arrested. So people are just asking for respect and they're not getting it from these companies.
All right, thank you. That's really moving. All right, anybody want to come off mute? And Dale, did you want to say something? You had your hand up before.
Did you just say me?
Yeah, I saw you had your hand up before. I don't know if we addressed what you wanted to say.
Yeah. Oh, how long do this Governor Shapiro's mutual interest agreement, how long does it last with CNX?
That's a very good question. And all I will say is that I hope that CNX is abiding by that mutual interest agreement. And I have requested a meeting with the governor numerous times. There's information I would like to share with his office. They are not accepting my invitation for a meeting. But I would love to have that with him. I think there's very important information that he should know, and that our community could share. So I want to open that up for his office as well. We would love
Public knowledge, though, right? This agreement was made when he came into power, and it's nowhere listed as what it involves. I mean, did they have to disclose this yearly to the public, what their findings are? I mean,
so if you get on the CNX Radical Transparency site, they kind of lay out different things that they should be doing, and what they're say that they should be doing. Also, that mutual interest agreement does as well, and I can send that to Jim. But we basically can only hope that CNX is doing things right. We know in the past that they have not, and we also know they're a criminal company.
yeah, so there's no teeth to it. In other words, nobody's monitoring what they're saying.
Well, we know that the DEP
The DEP
is collaborating with them according to what CNX is saying. So I can leave it at that.
Oh,
What I find so shocking, Del, is that they Governor Shapiro made that announcement, that public announcement with CNX, and yet to this day, like Jodi had said previously, they have never yet shared publicly the results of those studies through Pitt. And
Studies. Mhm.
I would think that, that's something that the public should be aware of. And yet it's over a year gone by and there's not a word, not a peep.
Well, I read the results when they came out. They were posted through the Sarah, somebody. I read them. Jim, do you know?
Jim,
No, it was the Clean Air Council, or somebody had them and was posting them.
I mean, they're out there, but the governor has never publicly
Oh, I see what
out
you're
there and said,
Yeah.
these are the results of the study that, was done through University of Pittsburgh, and these are the findings. And it's just, to me, shocking and hurtful, because that's something that the public should definitely be made aware of in a public statement.
Yeah.
Public statement. Okay.
All right, let me suggest I have a couple of slides to close this out, and then I'll turn off the recorder. And then if you guys have time, we can keep talking if people are interested in having that discussion. So let me share my screen for a second. Thank you to our speakers today, Jodi and Janice from the Center for Coalfield Justice. Really appreciate the effort you put into this and the discussion we've had today. I want to remind everybody that this is a webinar series. We've got one left. December 5th is electric vehicle myths. We've had a change in our lineup. Our panelists are going to be Dennis Rowan, Fred Crable, and new to the panel is Rob Altenberg from Penn Future Energy Center. So I'll include that in the follow-up email, and you can consider registering for that last webinar. And then this recording for this program will be on the Sierra Club Pennsylvania chapter's YouTube channel. Look for it there, and I'll also include a link in the follow-up email. So thank you all for joining us today. Thank you very much. Where can I find it?